Your manager controls like 70% of your engagement at work. Yet corporate America promotes the absolute wrong person into that job a staggering 82% of the time. Welcome to the deep dive.
It is a pretty wild statistic to start with, yeah.
It really is. And, we're looking at a piece of research today that completely upends what we think of when we hear the word boss. I actually saw a quote from this source material printed on a random piece of workplace apparel recently, of all places. And it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Oh, really? What did it say?
It said, you can't call yourself a leader if no one grows when you're around.
Wow. It's a phenomenal provocation, isn't it? It just completely strips away all the corporate jargon, all the KPI talk, and gets right down to the actual human utility of management.
Exactly. And that is the mission for our deep dive today. We are exploring this fascinating, honestly incredibly dense research paper by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover. It's titled Leadership as a Growth Engine. And we're going to deconstruct this research to figure out why the traditional concept of the manager, the person who just delegates tasks and checks your work, why that's rapidly becoming obsolete.
Because it is. It really is.
Yeah. And instead, we'll see how true competitive advantage actually stems from leaders who prioritize one specific outcome above everything else, which is relentlessly building up the capabilities of you and your team.
It represents a massive paradigm shift. We're moving away from the idea of a leader as just an elite decision maker or a glorified taskmaster. The new model positions the leader as a literal engine for human development.
And this matters directly to you listening to this right now. Whether you are currently managing a massive distributed global team, or maybe you're just stepping into your very first leadership role.
Or even if you aren't managing anyone at all yet.
Right. Frankly, if you're an individual contributor, simply trying to figure out if you are working for the right person, this deep dive is going to fundamentally reframe how you measure workplace success.
Okay, let's unpack this. Yeah, to really grasp what a great leader looks like in the modern economy, we first have to understand why the current, traditional model of management is failing so catastrophically.
Right.
There's this systemic disconnect in corporate America regarding how people actually end up in positions of power. The research calls this a selection failure.
A selection failure.
Yeah. Organizations have this deeply ingrained habit of promoting individuals into management based almost entirely on two things: technical mastery or tenure.
Okay, so meaning like you happen to be the absolute best coder on the floor, so congratulations, you are now the engineering manager.
Exactly. Or you've been in regional sales the longest, so you get bumped up to sales director.
Right. It's just the default.
It's the path of least resistance for HR departments. But the research makes it abundantly clear that the skills required to be a top-tier individual contributor are fundamentally different from the core capability required for leadership.
Because they're completely different jobs.
Completely different. Managing your own workflow is a solo sport. Developing the latent capabilities of others is a totally different psychological discipline.
Let's talk about the data the source brings in here, because the failure rate is honestly staggering.
It really is. The paper cites Gallup data showing that organizations promote the right person into management positions only about 18% of the time.
18%? That's terrible.
It's abysmal. And furthermore, the data suggests that only about 1 in 10 people possess a natural baseline talent for management. So we have this incredibly high-stakes role filled almost entirely by people who were, frankly, never selected for the actual skills the role requires.
Right. I hear the argument, but let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
If I'm running a highly specialized division, say an aerospace engineering team, doesn't it make logical sense to promote my top performing engineer? I mean, don't they have the most institutional knowledge? Shouldn't they be the ones passing down their elite technical skills to the junior members?
In a static world where technology barely changes, that logic holds up perfectly.
Okay.
But the research points out a critical why now factor that completely breaks that old model. We are living in a landscape of wildly accelerating technological change. The half-life of specialized skills is shrinking faster than ever before.
So the skills just don't last.
Right. What that means practically is that a technical skill learned today might be completely obsolete in 3 years.
Oh, wow. So static expertise, knowing exactly how to execute a specific technical task right this second, That's basically a depreciating asset.
Completely. It's expiring. If a manager is just dictating tasks based on their old technical expertise, they are actively passing down an expiring playbook.
And the whole team falls behind the market.
Exactly. What organizations actually need to survive isn't static knowledge, it was continuous capability renewal. And there's a brutal economic reality attached to this, too.
Which is?
Replacing a knowledge worker currently costs an organization roughly 100 to 150% of their annual salary.
Because of what? Recruitment fees? The massive drain on productivity.
Yeah, and just the months it takes to get a new hire fully up to speed.
Right. So retaining people by actively developing their skills isn't just some nice, touchy-feely HR initiative anymore.
No, not at all. It is a harsh strategic imperative. If you aren't developing your talent, they will stagnate, your competitors will absolutely poach them, and the financial drain of constantly replacing them will just sink your balance sheet.
Man. So if the old model of the technical expert boss is completely broken, what does the actual solution look like? Let's get into the anatomy of what the research calls a growth-centered leader.
Okay, so the paper breaks this down into 3 distinguishing pillars.
Let's hear them.
The first is an abundance mindset. Growth-centered leaders are fundamentally not threatened by capable subordinates.
Which is the exact opposite of the classic, insecure middle manager who actively hoards knowledge because they view their top performers as a threat to their own job security.
Yeah, it's zero-sum thinking versus abundance thinking. An insecure manager thinks, if you look too good, I look bad.
Right.
But a growth leader recognizes that their own success is entirely dependent on elevating the team to a point where the team outgrows them.
That makes total sense. What's the second pillar?
The second is deliberate capability diagnosis.
Okay, meaning what exactly?
This means stepping away from those generic, one-size-fits-all corporate training modules that everyone just clicks through while checking their email.
Oh, yeah. We all know those.
Right. A growth-centered leader actually invests the psychological energy to understand a team member's specific current capabilities and their personal growth aspirations. They don't just assign training, they prescribe development based on a deep understanding of where that individual actually wants to go.
And I imagine you can't really do that unless you are actually talking to your people about things other than this week's deliverables.
You have to know them on a human level, yes. You have to have those conversations. And that leads directly into the third pillar, which is progressive challenge. The paper draws heavily on the developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky and his concept of the zone of proximal development.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that actually look like in practice?
So a growth-centered leader calibrates your work assignments so they land just slightly beyond your current capability level.
Like just out of reach.
Exactly. Because if they give you something you already know how to do perfectly, you're bored. If they give you something 3 levels above your head, you panic.
You just freeze up.
Right. The zone of proximal development is that sweet spot in the middle. They provide just enough structural support so you don't drown, but enough novel challenge that you are forced to stretch and expand your cognitive skills to succeed.
That's how you trigger flow states.
Yes.
That feeling when a task requires so much of your focus that time kind of melts away, but it's not so overwhelming that you get anxious. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I'm looking at these 3 pillars. Maintaining an abundance mindset, diagnosing everyone's individual capabilities, carefully calibrating custom stretch assignments for every single team member. And it sounds like a massive full-time job.
It does take time, yeah.
So I have to push back here. Let's say I'm a VP of sales. My bonus, my job security, and my company's stock price are tied to hitting this quarter's revenue targets, not my team's spiritual or educational growth.
Right.
If my main output is just capability development, how does the business not just tank? Like, operations still have to run.
It is the most common resistance to this model, and honestly, it's a completely valid fear.
Yeah.
But the research clarifies that operational excellence is absolutely not neglected by growth-centered leaders. It is simply reframed. The leader has to make a fundamental, often really painful transition from doing the work to enabling the work.
Walk me through the mechanics of that.
Okay, so if you are that VP of sales, and you are still the one stepping in to personally close all the biggest deals because you are the best at it.
Which feels good in the moment.
It does, but you have essentially become a bottleneck for your own company's growth. You don't scale. What scales is a highly capable team of 30 people who all know how to close big deals.
Ah,
When a leader focuses intensely on building team capabilities, sustained high performance, and hitting those operational targets, they emerge as a natural, inevitable byproduct.
so they aren't abandoning the revenue targets at all. They're just recognizing that building a better machine is a much more reliable way to hit those targets long term than just running the old machine into the ground.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, leadership is essentially an ongoing process of transferring your capability to the people around you.
Wow.
If you are still holding on to the execution, you aren't leading. You're just a highly paid individual contributor with a fancy title.
That makes a lot of sense when we talk about the high-level philosophy.
Mhm.
Let's bring this down to the ground level, though. I want to talk about daily execution. How does a growth-centered leader actually behave on a random Tuesday afternoon when the pressure is on?
It mostly comes down to the mechanics of how they handle three things: feedback, delegation, and failure.
Okay.
And we have to start with feedback because the gap between what employees want and what organizations actually deliver is mind-blowing.
The source material is completely ruthless on this point. 60% of employees say they want feedback on a daily or weekly basis,
Yeah.
but only 23% actually get it that frequently.
It's a huge gap.
And the real kicker is that when they do finally get feedback, it's almost entirely an evaluation of past mistakes.
And we now know from neuroscientific research exactly why that fails. Backward-looking evaluation actually triggers a threat response.
Literally a biological response.
Yes. When a manager sits you down to dissect a mistake you made 3 weeks ago, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, it fires up. Cortisol spikes.
So you go into fight or flight.
Exactly. And when that happens, the prefrontal cortex, which is the learning and logic center of your brain, literally shuts down. Purely corrective feedback makes it biologically impossible for an employee to learn in that moment.
They just get defensive and shut down.
Yeah.
So how do the best companies fix that mechanism?
The research highlights some incredible real-world pivots. Look at Microsoft under Satya Nadella. They intentionally recognized this biological reality and shifted from what they called a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture.
I love that phrasing.
It's great. They completely scrapped the traditional annual performance review, which is essentially just a highly stressful, backward-looking ranking system, and they replaced it with continuous, ongoing conversations they call connects.
And Deloitte did something very similar, completely ditching the annual review for frequent check-ins, right?
He did, yeah.
So what makes a check-in mechanically different from a review?
The critical shift is moving from the concept of feedback to feed forward.
Feed forward.
Yeah. It's a subtle linguistic change that creates a massive psychological difference. Instead of a manager sitting down and painfully dissecting why your presentation last Thursday failed to land with the client, a growth-centered leader asks, what specific capabilities do we need to develop together to ensure your next presentation lands perfectly?
Oh, okay. It envisions a hypothetical future state.
Exactly. Because it's focused on a future that hasn't happened yet, there is no ego threat. The amygdala doesn't fire. It bypasses the brain's defense mechanisms and immediately shifts the energy from defensive justification to collaborative problem solving.
Feed forward. That is incredibly practical. Okay, let's look at the second daily execution piece, delegation.
This is a big one. The research points out that managers waste roughly 40 to 50% of their time executing work that they could and absolutely should be delegating.
It's a massive capacity drain, and it's usually driven by the manager's own ego or that classic fatal trap of thinking it will just be faster if I do it myself. But let's clarify what good delegation actually is, because a lot of managers think delegation is just task offloading, like tossing some of the keys to a 747 mid-flight while you go take a nap in first class, and then blaming them when the plane nosedives.
That is a brilliant way to put it. Yeah, task offloading, just dumping your administrative busy work or throwing people into situations they aren't equipped for, that is terrible leadership.
Right.
The source material draws a sharp line between that and developmental delegation. Developmental delegation is putting them in the flight simulator first. It is highly intentional.
Okay, so how does the flight simulator work in a corporate context?
It involves giving a team member an assignment that requires a modest but real extension of their current skills, hitting that zone of proximal development we discussed, and importantly, wrapping a scaffolded support framework around them.
So they aren't just out there alone.
Right. You define the specific boundaries, you clarify exactly what decision rights they have, and you establish clear check-in milestones. The paper highlights General Electric's historical approach to this. They systematically gave their high-potential employees massive stretch assignments, like asking them to lead a struggling, complex business unit.
Which sounds absolutely terrifying.
It is. But here is the mechanism that made it work. There was an explicit, culturally embedded expectation that some of these initiatives would fail.
Oh, they expected it.
Yes, the senior leaders were always there to mentor, but they rigorously resisted the urge to swoop in and solve the problems for the employee when things got rocky.
Because the friction is where the learning happens.
Exactly.
But that brings up a really crucial underlying requirement. None of this, the feed-forward conversations, the terrifying stretch assignments, the expected failures, none of it functions at all without a foundation of psychological safety.
It is the bedrock. Psychological safety is the shared belief across a team that interpersonal risk-taking is safe. If you don't have that, employees will aggressively hide their weaknesses.
Of course.
They will actively avoid your stretch assignments because they are terrified that looking incompetent while learning will just hurt their career.
The paper uses Pixar animation studios and their brain trust process as the ultimate example of this.
It's a beautiful illustration of how to engineer psychological safety. At Pixar, directors regularly present deeply flawed, unfinished, sometimes outright terrible early versions of their films to a group of trusted peers.
Wow.
Now, in most corporate environments, showing terrible work would destroy your reputation. The reason it works at Pixar is because of carefully cultivated behavioral norms. The critique in the room is rigorously, relentlessly focused on the problem, never on the person. The underlying assumption is that early work is necessarily imperfect.
So they make early failure completely safe. They separate the creator's ego from the creation itself.
Right. When a leader explicitly normalizes failure as a required, expected part of the learning process, and crucially, when that leader models vulnerability by openly admitting their own knowledge gaps, they create the psychological space for everyone else to actually take the risks required to grow.
Okay, so having an individual leader who gives feed forward, who uses developmental delegation, and who engineers psychological safety for their direct reports, that's all amazing.
Yeah, it is.
But relying on individual heroic managers scales really poorly. If you're a massive global organization, how do you guarantee this happens across 10,000 employees?
Right.
Like, how do we move from relying on superstars to building actual systems?
This is where the rubber meets the road. You have to institutionalize growth. It has to become a core organizational capability hardwired into the very fabric of how the company operates. You cannot just cross your fingers and hope you happen to hire managers who are natural developers of talent.
Right.
You have to aggressively change your structural incentives.
So you're talking about the heavy machinery of HR. Hiring rubrics, performance reviews, and most importantly, compensation.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, people optimize for what they get paid to do. Let's look at IBM. They fundamentally transformed their leadership development pipeline by literally tying executive variable compensation to leadership pipeline metrics.
Meaning, they explicitly tied their executives' bonuses to how well those executives develop the people underneath them.
Yes. Think about the mechanical shift that creates. If an executive gets their full bonus just for hitting Q3 revenue targets, they will gladly burn out their team to hit that number.
Sure.
But if a significant portion of their financial reward is contingent on building organizational capability and actively developing successors, suddenly talent development is no longer an HR afterthought.
It's front and center.
It becomes a primary daily operational objective. Money talks, and it forces behavioral alignment.
And beyond just paying people to care, the source material shows organizations actively democratizing access to development, flattening the hierarchy. Intel is a great example here.
Yeah, Intel implemented peer mentoring circles. These are small, structured groups of employees at similar levels who meet regularly to actively coach each other and problem solve.
Which completely bypasses the ego threat of traditional mentoring, right?
Right.
Because when a senior executive is evaluating you, your amygdala might still fire.
Definitely.
But a peer circle removes the manager as evaluator dynamic entirely.
Exactly. It flattens the hierarchy and proves that you don't need to wait around for a senior vice president to take you under their wing. There is massive, scalable developmental power in structured peer networks. And of course, technology is supercharging this democratization.
Yeah, the paper specifically examines Salesforce's Trailhead platform and MasterCard's The Academy.
Right.
These are essentially massive, integrated digital learning ecosystems.
And what's brilliant about them is their reliance on microlearning. Instead of forcing an employee to take a 3-day offsite seminar that they will forget 90% of, they deliver short, highly focused units of learning that take like 5 minutes to consume. It embeds the capability development directly into the daily workflow.
And there's a fascinating psychological hook these platforms use, too. They heavily utilize badging and public recognition.
Oh, it taps right into our dopamine loops, much like a well-designed video game. You earn a badge, you hit a visible milestone, and leadership publicly recognizes the achievement. It takes learning, which is traditionally something you do quietly in secret, and turns it into a celebrated, normative, highly visible part of the daily culture.
Wow.
This raises an important question. If all the data, the neuroscience, and the economic realities show that continuous learning and human capability development are the absolute true competitive advantages in the modern economy, why do so many companies still stubbornly reward managers solely for hitting short-term operational targets?
It's a massive contradiction.
It is the ultimate organizational lag. Far too many companies are still operating with a rigid 20th century industrial mindset while trying to compete in a 21st century knowledge economy. We are still managing dynamic, complex networks of human beings as if they are static cogs in an assembly line, rather than dynamic engines of future value.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? It means it is time to audit your own environment. Take a hard, objective look at your daily reality.
Yeah.
Are you receiving feedback that actively helps you envision and build your future capabilities, or are you just getting evaluated on your past mistakes? Are you being progressively challenged in a flight simulator, or are you stuck on a treadmill of static expertise? And if you are a manager, you have to ask yourself the really uncomfortable question. Are you holding on to 50% of the execution work because it's genuinely best for the business, or because your ego likes feeling indispensable?
And beyond just the daily execution of tasks, there is one final, profound, almost hidden impact mentioned in the research that we haven't touched on yet, and it might be the most vital takeaway of all:
Oh,
identity development.
what exactly is the mechanism behind identity development in the workplace?
Well, for most adults, work is a primary source of our identity. It is a massive part of how we define our value in the world. When a growth-centered leader gives you a carefully calibrated stretch assignment, when they intentionally push you into that zone of proximal development, they aren't just handing you a task.
Right.
They are actively, structurally communicating their confidence in your latent, hidden capabilities. And that external belief literally expands your professional self-concept. Good leadership doesn't just build technical skills, it builds bigger, more capable identities.
I'm going to stop you right there because that is the exact thought we need to leave on. If a manager's belief in you literally dictates the ceiling of your professional identity, who currently holds the pin to your identity, and is it time you took it back, that's what you need to mull over today. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep stretching, keep challenging yourself, and we will catch you next time.